Hey, Rob Bertholf here, and I'm excited to chat a little about collective I'm looking to put together around what we could consider the Marketing Guild. And really, the idea, if we were to kind of go through it, will be kind of introducing the concept of a guild, the current state of marketing, um, the different roles of connectors and doers, and then I think the model or the opportunity ahead of this. So ultimately, thinking about the guild model, guilds have existed throughout really a long time, right? In the medieval times, there was association of workers that kind of came together around a common goal or a mutual benefit. And there was a lot of reasons why, guilds existed. We read so many, documents about how really the guild model helped spur so many new, really movements. And so, when I look at really how the guilds have, were formed, they were there to set working conditions. They also gave things like health insurance and aided with like funeral expenses for some of their members internally, and then externally, they were there to guarantee quality of work, which I think is really important. And also they were there to help the less fortunate. And I think this too, this is a model that I think would be nice to kind of dust off and see if it applies, in today's society. So looking at kind of how that worked, there was different levels. They had the apprentice level, and this is where the parents would actually pay to send their kids to a master and for the master to teach them. And they were there for years before graduating, and it was kind of strict conditions. And once they kind of started understanding what they were doing, they graduated up into the journeyman status. And here they were really kind of, again, really learning a trade, working very hard. And ultimately, the name journeyman actually comes from the idea that they journeyed from city to city and learned from different masters and really kind of wanted to get a greater understanding of how it all worked. And at some point, when they were ready, they created a masterpiece. And that masterpiece was something that was created to show really the quality of the work. Maybe it was a sword, or maybe it was, armor, or, talking more in a kind of forged type of scenario. But ultimately, what happened was when that piece of work, that masterpiece got accepted, they become a master. And now they would own their own shop, and they worked with other masters really to protect the trade and help out in the community. And I think this is a really interesting model. This concept evolved over time. I think the problem is that the motivation to share and teach altruistically was maybe competed against with the need for power and greed. And so some of these were distorted. We do see how in more modern times we have more like unions, right? And we kind of look through, and I'll skip over some of this here, but we look through this idea of how the guild has actually kind of moved into unions, and they're somewhat similar in the sense that they both really are based around an occupation, and they want to fight for wages and good conditions. But a guild also has more about the training and more about regulating the quality. And so, there's a number of different modern guilds, the Writers Guilds, Directors Guild. We hear a lot of these regularly. But what's interesting is that these haven't really transferred into, and there's other ones maybe, but they haven't really transferred into the digital marketing space. And so, we have seen, community of practice. This term came about in the book, Thomas Malone's book, Future of Work. And this kind of came about, which is kind of like a modern day guild. What we've seen this happen is more around companies, Spotify as an example, where they're kind of organizing within of a company. But ultimately what it comes down to, for me anyways, is peer mentorship. It kind of feels alone sometimes when we're out being the solopreneur, and maybe we don't have a team, or maybe we do. But I remember back in the day when I was getting started off, it was very lonely. And having someone to learn from and having peers that I reached out to was really important for me early in my career. And I think like peer mentorship plus future peer pathing. And what I mean by this is, it seems there's an industry around training, right? And there's an industry around, pumping out courses and, trying to sell, content to our youth, right? Our next generation. And while there's nothing wrong with that, I think what happens is that I'd love for there to be more of an incentive for mentorship. And I'm a firm proponent that mentorship is free, but I also believe that coaching can be very important. And I kind of wanted to figure out how could we create, really this an environment where peer mentorship existed, but also kind of a hand up and a hand out sort of, hand up, so to speak, and hand down, where we're actually also helping, those coming after us. And so rather than it being something where it's only, I guess, formed around the elites, why not create it to be inclusive and create pathways and maybe, encourage the vetting of information and discourage misinformation. I know this is specific around some of the career fields like SEO, discourage low quality work and encourage practicing skills training, discourage this concept of scarcity where, we have to fight for every little piece for ourselves, and think of this idea of community and sharing of projects even, and looking at how we can really form a collective that helps us all out. Discouraging the exclusivity mindset, encouraging career progression, and developing a model that incentivizes pathing and incentivizes mentorship. Thinking about moving away from commoditization. With automation, so many of these roles are commoditized, and with so many different forms of marketing, they're becoming quite commodity based in the sense that you hear, oh, my cousin can do that, my daughter can do that, my front desk, my secretary can do that, and it really brings the perceived value down. And so I think this is even more reason for, yes, even embracing automation, but embracing it within the guild, and even more than that, really speaking to the value of craftsmanship and speaking to the value of why you would want to have a professional do something and be willing to pay for a professional to do something. And so this isn't about coming together and decreasing wages. In fact, it's actually more about how can we identify what fair wages are, and how can we incentivize where we're not fighting with the lowest common denominator, and we're actually coming together and saying this is a fair wage. Not that you have to stick to that, not that we're going to enforce that, but more along the lines of what is fair, and kind of maybe having some ranges or having things that we see that we've identified. Also, thinking about how can we even split up what we do, where we can either be part of a collective or outsource something to a collective. And so, when I think if we were to look at the current state of marketing right now, there's a lot of problems that I see specifically around freelancers and solo practitioners. And so, one of those problems is on this idea of the service offering. I see way too many times, people are taking on work that they're not qualified to fulfill. So the problem with that is it brings down the entire community, and they think, well, it's not that important. They didn't do a very good job. So, the whole thing is a scam because, and I see this in SEO a lot. Right? Well, SEO doesn't really work. Well, no, it actually works really, really well, but you have to have somebody that knows what they're doing, right? And so the problem that we'll see this sometimes where some agencies may think, well, I'll go ahead and do the SEO because to me, SEO just means writing some page titles or whatever that means to them. And they're afraid of actually losing that client if they were to outsource that. Right? Or if they weren't to provide it at all, maybe they lose the client. Or if they were to outsource it, maybe they lose the client in the way that that other vendor, may, try and take the client or whatever it would be. Maybe the other reasons just they don't want to leave money on the table, but I see this very, very often. And so thinking through what's the solution, and I think the solution would be a controlled collaboration. And controlled being that pivotal word here, where we can actually be able to vet, if you were to say, okay, you know what, I can't do the SEO portion. I'm going to bring somebody in that can do that. And again, I'm just using SEO as an example. I'm going to bring somebody that can do that. But how do I know they're even good? Or how do I know they're not going to disappear? How do I know they're not going to take my client, right? All these different pieces. And so I think kind of, with that, having a guild system would vet them, would ensure that, there was ultimately kind of a rating system around, handing people back and forth in terms of clients and in terms of work, thinking about actually being able to see average response times and partnership ratings or product quality ratings, and those would be specific to whatever task that they're doing. So that way we really know who we can reach out to for support. More than that, what becomes interesting is that even a solo practitioner could become a full-service agency in the sense that they could outsource every aspect of what a client needs into the collective, into the guild. Think of it almost like, a machine, a factory that spits this out. And so, the second piece that I think when I see is the splitting of responsibilities. And too often I see freelancers starting off and they're doing sales and then fulfillment. But what the problem with that is that the cycles, as they get a sale, they may nurture those leads, close it, and then they may have a couple other leads in the pipeline that kind of get abandoned as they're diving down to actually do the work. And then when that project's done, they're like, oh, I'm already spent the money on that. So now I've got to get another sale. But in this instance, those other leads maybe already withered on the vine. They may have gone with somebody else. So we got to start by getting new leads again. And this process ultimately makes it unprofitable, really, for most practitioners. And I think the answer to this is really splitting the lines and having ultimately people that sell and people that fulfill. Now, we know this, right? That's how you form an agency. And as a freelancer or a solo practitioner grows their agency, maybe the first person they hire is that salesperson. And that's a really smart thing to do, if you have the ability to then fulfill that. So kind of thinking through this, what is the model that allows us to ultimately kind of, divide up sales and fulfillment? Okay. Thinking through even what if we looked at them as connectors and doers? Connectors, what if we even allowed them to be completely different where a connector actually doesn't fulfill at all? So this would allow us to actually have an entire guild around salespeople and maybe account managers who are ultimately selling and just staying what they do, selling all day, every day, and then doers who are really great at fulfilling, just fulfill all day, every day. I know a lot of my friends who are practitioners, they don't want to talk to clients half the time. A lot of them really just want to sit behind their desk, zone out and just, geek out. And I think that, it becomes more profitable if they can do that. I also know I've taken on a few mentees who wanted to, said, hey, I want to learn about, XYZ, marketing practitionership. And then when we get into it, they're like, I kind of just like selling. I don't really like the doing part, right? And I see this more and more. And so I do think there's this opportunity to think about connectors and doers individually versus collectively. Collectively, but segmented. And so this thought of like, what is a connector, right? And a connector is, we would literally be able, with this concept, to create an agency in a box. Anybody, if they weren't fulfilling the work, if they're using the guild to fulfill all the work, could just say, you know what, like I quit my job, I'm going to go out. All they've got to do is, sign up, put in their logo, put in their company name, the basic details, right? Select what they want to sell. And maybe there is some aspect of, I'm going to handle fulfillment through my internal team, or I'm going to do social media through my internal team, but I don't want to do design or SEO or whatever it is. They can even say, I don't even want to do paid ads. I don't want to do branding, whatever it is that they don't want to sell. But the idea is that they could specify what they want to sell. And interestingly enough, anything that comes from the marketplace, meaning that they're not fulfilling, they could actually use logos and things like that and case studies and testimonials from the guild members that would be doing that project. And so what this gives them is a, up and running quickly, the ability to just, overnight, agency in a box. And so we've actually tested this. And we tested this concept where I literally took my proposals, we took off, we added at the top of it, their name, one of my mentees' names and, their details. And, they went from selling, let's say, a $500 a month product into looking at a $20,000 upfront and, $7,500 a month. That is a change that normally takes you potentially decades to get to, or, years to get to. But they were able to do that literally in weeks because they didn't need to build and establish their own credibility. All they had to do was understand how to deliver value, how to demonstrate the value that would be given, because they wouldn't be doing the fulfillment. They just needed to be a connector and do the sales. And so we kind of breaking down this concept that, there's different, classifications maybe. And again, this could be a work in progress, right? But thinking maybe there's around 20% for the sale. And that could be, if it's just a referral, maybe it's a qualified referral. So this could be maybe even more an affiliate side, an assisted sale, right? Or maybe it's an unassisted sale where they do the whole thing and they get that full 20%. Maybe we break out another aspect of that of account management. And then maybe the other remaining 70% is really based around project management, fulfillment, and most specifically, quality control, right? That QA element at the end there, I think, is what would be really valuable to the guild. And so budgeting in that ability to do QA, which we'll talk about in a second. So ultimately, this model creates an insane sales pipeline because people just focus on sales, right? All of my sales contacts, they would love to just stay out selling, but they're always worried about, can I find someone to fulfill this? And I think this is where this idea of the doers comes in really well. So organizing around the doers, we think, okay, how do we deal with a lot of sales? It's a lot of account fulfillment. And so I thought, well, how would Henry Ford approach web marketing, right? And the answer is an assembly line. And so what we see here is this A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A assembly line, where every station is our guild workers. And the little trucks are essentially our connectors. And so a project would come in to the first station, and the first station is A, audience. And so we would be able to do an automated or self-guided intake, or this would be done by the account manager, the salesperson. We'd do this initial intake, right? We'd ask them step-by-step questions. Once they've kind of got that, we move into brand discovery. So now what we're doing is we're pulling out really kind of the intake aspect of this. This is where we would be handed off to, let's say, a brand strategist to come in if they had a budget for that. Otherwise, we'd have a questionnaire, just at least pull some basic elements of this. And then we move into the positioning side. So this would be a brand strategist would come in and actually help them, with their value proposition, or help them with these pieces, thinking that it's a station-based approach. We then move into the personality, and this is kind of where we're now moving into more of the traits and the voice and choosing, colors with color theory or topography, etc. So we're choosing that for them, as part of this next station, working with them on that. Then we move in the presentation layer. This is where we bring in the designers, right? And maybe it's around the logo, or maybe it's specifically around names and things like this. Ultimately, then we move to the next station, C, for content. And this is the ideation side. So we work with keyword research, developing content, site maps, right? Then we actually, develop that content and create that content, right, with the copywriters. Then we hand that off next to the next station. We're actually doing any sort of additional design elements, whether it's a web theme or infographics or any sort of linkable assets that needs to be social media profiles, things like that, tiles, whatever it is. And then we hand off any sort of development needed, whether this is setting up on a content management system and any sort of custom functionality necessary, then hand them off to the community side. And so each of these stations, by the way, ultimately have their own guild, have their own subset, where we have people that are train in each of these and do these really, really well. So we have then somebody comes in this on the community side, and they're able to maybe put together an executed social strategy, or even put together platform-specific campaign, whatever that would be, based on the larger communication strategy that was developed early on. And then we move into building and buying, and this is going to be ads, or this is going to be SEO, getting visibility to that content in that community. And then finally we'll end with the A. And that's analytics. So this is whether it's setting up tracking and then monitoring that, or ultimately just looking at their KPIs and how to improve the overall system. And so the factory workers are all guild members, like we mentioned. The way that this would work is I modernized the labels. So apprentice becomes trainee, journeyman stays journeyman, and professional, a master becomes professional. And so now looking at that trainee, let's say they take on a project. Let's just say the project's $100. They take on the project and they get $30 for doing it. And a journeyman or professional would actually get the other 70% to mentor them through this and actually help them with how to do it and QA their work and really put that seal of approval on it. So why that we talked earlier about this idea of how do we incentivize mentorship? This is the model that I'm seeing anyways, and I'd love your feedback on this. But the model I'm seeing is that we start off where a trainee is getting some money to actually work on something. They're given tasks. We actually build out protocols. We build out very clear protocols for every station. And then we just QA against that. As that trainee does enough projects, a certain amount of projects where they're now promoted up into journeyman status, well, now they're at this level where they're doing 70%, right? And they're passing off 30% to a professional level who then QAs their work and helps them with like the little nuances. Here's how I do this. Here's how to approach that. And so they're really getting, there's a mechanism here. They're getting incentivized to be mentored. Finally, once you reach the professional level, you're getting 100% of the project. Now, this would be split up. This kind of split is if it's a lead coming through the system. But if you're outside the system, you don't, in the sense of it's not you're about your own leads in or it's your own customer. Like we're not trying to change any of that. So that would stay that you get 100%. On anything that's yours that you want to have as yours, but more like if you wanted to help a mentee, help a trainee, then you can start collecting on that, and that's why this model is a split model. And so again, kind of speaking more to this is a three-sided marketplace. So there's apprentices, practitioners, and then ultimately clients. So thinking of these kind of people that are being trained, people that can help train, and then clients. And so I've actually been building out different dashboards, different web properties for this. By the way, I'll share each of these in their own video coming up. But there's a lot of tech. I've been working on this for about 5 years. And there's a lot of tech sitting below the waterline now that's going to help fulfill and support this process. So thinking of this, once we get the guild set up with the journeymen and the professionals, where we'll be targeting first, we then start onboarding in some trainees, as well as allowing some noviceships, which is do-it-yourself or self-paced training. So the idea that is that they'll go through self-paced training. Once they get graduate from that, they become a trainee level. They get access maybe to the member directory. Once they then graduate up, they get access to taking on tasks and being a part of the larger ecosystem. And so that's kind of the plan is right now I'm organizing around just a small working group of practitioners. I don't want to get it too large, only focusing on really master level or maybe some journeyman level. We're going to bring in a few example clients. I've got tons of clients that want in the system. So we'll bring in a couple of clients in to do some projects on to kind of like vet the system, vet the process, see how this all works, and start having some case studies. I also have a number of different software products that we'll be launching. For each station, there's a software product, and that will actually help feed revenue into the guild, as well as really support and incentivize masters or professionals, I should say, to help build out more training and really a certification program. Once we have that in place, then we'll bring in the apprentices and then start pathing and leveling people up. So this is kind of what the website looks like. This was the mock-ups. We can actually go to the real one. But this is kind of what the mock-ups look like. This idea of, by being a part of this, you get access to training material, peer mentorship, tools, resources, and more interestingly, from a Doers Guild, you'll actually get leads and be able to even outsource some of your work to other people and be able to kind of have that collaboration. So it's great for students, practitioners, and executives. Ultimately, we'll end up having a lot of curriculum. And if you aren't familiar with this, at the end of the slide, I'll show you some of the courses I've already built out. But I have a lot of content that I've been building out over the last several years that'll go with part of this, and then also build out the ability for the community to collaborate and crowdsource more training material for each station and really keep the protocols active and live. And they'll be incentivized through to do that. And so the question becomes, how do I ultimately, reach that professional level? And so we did a room last week in Clubhouse talking about, what are the different methods of identifying, because when we open this up, everyone's going to want to say, well, I should be a professional level, and so how do we not hurt people's feelings and also quantify that? And that's why, we talked through, like, we could do through past history, we could do some sort of community participation with badges, but I think the best way is ultimately just job completion. So if we're able to, if they're able to create protocols and really clearly identify how to do something with protocols, that ultimately is how we will choose who's at that professional level. Although we did dive deep into this of how to look at it, but I think we figured out the best way. Again, like I mentioned, every station has some software. We're right now in the process of launching out TASOB, which is the art of science and branding. We'll then launch out the content station, the design station, the development station. So every station ultimately will have a tool that will also bring money into the guild. And the idea of that is that our revenue will be coming from sponsorship, memberships, affiliates, and then also affiliate essentially through the software. With that should generate a good amount of revenue in, which then we can then use for scholarships, use for guild dividends. So any of the members that are in the guild that are contributing get access, get essentially a salary from that. And then also there's a give back aspect of this, which is a concept called Nurtured Tribe. And so I'm looking at doing donations to Nurtured Tribe. And what this is a platform that helps establish communal, intentional communities. And with this third component, so a lot of times we think of intentional communities as being, off-grid, and which a lot of these will be, but kind of really thinking about, just, maybe they're building hammocks or they're doing tofu or something like that. But our goal on this kind of project here is actually to bring in a digital aspect. And so ultimately what that allows for is three groups of people to be on these in these intentional communities. One group of people working in the lands and working in the garden and cooking and having really wholesome food. Another group, the spiritual group, that's really there to maybe it's being outreach in the community, or whether it's counseling, whatever whatever role they want to take on, and then the guild will actually feed members into ultimately these digital roles. And so many of these intentional communities will actually have some members that are there to support the community through digital roles. And so that's something of this idea that we can even people that want to get off of the grid or get off of the supply chain, but they don't know how they're going to sustain themselves financially, can actually come and get pathed through the guild and make money by taking on projects to support that overall community. And so I think the greatness, if we were to do kind of the competitive advantage, it's really this idea of a capitalist socialist hybrid. So it's the idea of capitalism meets socialism, and that's ultimately more information is found here on in Nurtured Tribe if you want to learn more about that. But ultimately, I think there's something big happening here. Like I said, I've been under the waterline for quite a many years, getting this ready, getting the platform, the infrastructure set up to handle this. And so now is the time to start putting together our working group, which we've got a few people on board already. We've got another clubhouse room actually coming up in a couple hours now. So if you'd like to join those clubhouse rooms, just go ahead and reach out. My email address or LinkedIn. Also my Instagram is also Bertholf, my last name. So reach out to any of those platforms, and would love to connect and talk more about ultimately what we got going here. All right, thanks everyone.